Welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, Brenda Slokowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich. Hi, Brenda.
Hey, David, and welcome, Skyliners.
Welcome to the millions and millions of Skyliners out there. We know you're watching. We know you're listening because you can't be watching us yet. We're not on video. And you're surely subscribing. You're definitely downloading, listening, streaming.
Liking, commenting.
Yeah, I don't see as many comments as I'd like.
Listen, David, your expectations are too high then.
We are attorneys, Side and Shine PC. PC is a professional corporation. And yes, we're professionals. We're professional attorneys.
I'm hella professional.
We're not professional podcasters, though, but we think that we want to spread the word, spread the good word about housing.
It sounds like you're like
a preacher. So for those who have not joined us on this podcast before, I am David Shamshovich, a partner at Side and Shine. I'm here with
Brenda Slokowski. I'm an associate at Side and Shine.
Listen, anything is possible.
Just believe.
If you just click your feet 3 times and say, I wish I were home. Well, we both said, I like how we both said that the wrong way. There's no place like home.
Right. That's
is the word. It's a good quote because there's no place like housing. There's no place like housing.
You know what? Everybody deserves a home.
And you know who we talk with today about housing?
Mr. Tucker Reed.
Tucker Reed.
Totem Brooklyn.
That's right. Totem Brooklyn, a client of ours, and a developer who's making a great name for themselves currently. They've only been around for 5 or 6 years, but they're doing some really cool projects. We're doing a couple of their mandatory inclusionary housing projects and doing some 421A work on those projects as well. And we discussed that with Tucker. We discussed his illustrious career, which has spanned the public and the private sectors. He worked for Two Trees for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
He was
lost from them.
He had a lot of experience, and I know we've had a lot of developers and others on this podcast who've been similar in age, but at the age of 31, he was the president of Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, which is a nonprofit that was responsible for spurring residential and commercial development in Brooklyn. That's no small feat. I mean, imagine that kind of responsibility on the shoulders of someone at 31. I think at 31, I must have been 5th or 6th year associate, something like that. Just pretty much not even, in the first 10 years of my career. And he's doing this really great work. And he also worked for Two Trees. He became familiar with Jen and David Walensky from Two Trees. And he also worked for the State Department. And eventually he opened up Totem to, create a development firm that he could be in charge of. He wanted to create the house.
He wanted to shape
the New York City skyline. Woo! That was
our applause button is amazing.
It's really great when we get that synergy going and we finish each other's
sentences.
Oh, I was going to say sandwiches.
Oh, but I never know what to do the frozen reference.
That's okay. It's okay because I say sandwiches all the time. In any event, Tucker was such a great guest, very knowledgeable and very opinionated, and has what I think is the correct opinion. He goes out to the community, talks to the people, spends a lot of time, years and years before development gets off the ground, talking to those in the community groups, and seeing how they can work with them to make this thing function, make it work, and make it go off the ground. He's been through a couple of ULURPs, and he's going through another one now, and he'll talk about those projects and about his career, which has been very decorated and illustrious, and he's done many things.
Yeah.
And we're excited for everybody to hear this episode, right, Brad?
I really liked it. It was, as much as we talked to different developers, each developer has a different outlook on how they approach their business. And Tucker was very unique in his, while he has the same methodology of going to the community and making sure you do the proper outreach, his motivation and his perspective is very unique to himself and Totem as a whole, where they really believe that the whole project, the end goal is what matters, and taking the individual parts will make your whole greater.
Yeah. And that's the reason that they're called Totem. And he'll tell the story as a parable about how the sum of the parts is greater than the individual. And it sums up that development company, which is very young, but in my opinion, and he was very, I think, humble during the podcast, but really they've done some amazing things in their short time. And because they have Tucker and his partner, Vivian, and they have a lot of experience in both public and private sector, which is why I think they were able to really take off in such a short amount of time and be as successful so far as they have been.
In shaping the New York City skyline? If Camilla was here, she would yell at me for saying it a third time.
Well, there's no reason not to promote the name of the firm.
Right. Everybody, we work for Side and Shine. We do a lot of work here.
The name of the podcast.
And our side job at Side and Shine, shaping the New York City skyline.
We do this because we love to educate. We love to talk to our clients and to the people that we work with.
Love to talk.
Yeah, that's mostly me because I'm so verbose.
Yeah.
And everybody, you guys should really leave us some comments, some feedback. And if there's ways that you think we can improve this show, if there are guests that you want to suggest, give us a call.
If you have any legal questions, send me an email.
Yeah, send us an email at info@sideandshine.com or shapingthenycskyline@sideandshine.com. If you have no idea
That
how to
is
spell
not
that.
our email. Is that our email?
Shapingthenycskyline@sideandshine.com. Yeah.
That's whoa, that's a verbose email. I did not use that properly.
I must have made that up because I'm the verbose one. You can certainly ask questions. We'll read them on the air. No, there's no air.
Yeah.
We'll read them on the recorded air.
On the recording. On the pod.
I think maybe we do. You know what?
Oh, what if we added a segment of FAQs?
I think that would be great.
Or like a tidbit, like a segment at the end being like, our tip of the day is make sure you get your 421A application in before the deadline.
By the way, too late for those 421 applications. Right. Even if you get them in now, you're way past the deadline and you're not going to get a loan.
It expired last week.
Talk to Tucker. And without further ado, everybody, please welcome Mr. Tucker Reed.
Hey, David.
Hi, Brenda. How you doing?
How you doing?
It's really great to be back here in the recording studio. It's not really a recording studio. We should get like special walls and stuff like that for like soundproofing and stuff. We have a really cool sign outside. So I think that that does wonders and make sure that people don't come in to disturb us.
We're really taking off. So I feel like the walls are the next step.
The walls, you mean like soundproofing them?
Yeah.
Oh, I have
like
padded
put the
walls
egg
in my office.
on, you know?
So this way I can bounce back and forth as I'm doing work. It focuses me, I feel.
I think so too.
And wakes me up at the same time. It's great to be back. It's a beautiful day. Finally, there's some sunshine. Finally, the rain's gone. And we have an amazing guest who I'm very excited to introduce. He's a Connecticut native, but he's now an avid New Yorker. He has extremely long historical ties with Brooklyn, where his grandparents lived and also met in Sunset Park specifically. Yeah, it's very cute. And I'm sure you'll tell us about it, or at least touch on it. He's a graduate of Wesleyan University, which is a personal favorite of mine because I'm a huge How I Met Your Mother fan. And of course, you must have dormed with Lin-Manuel Miranda. And what was the movie you were in? 7 Minutes in Heaven.
What?
I feel like I played that game one time.
Wait, you were in a movie?
It was a play.
It was his directorial debut.
This was in the young days of emerging Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yeah. Before he had the budgets to make movies all over the world. Yeah.
But you're not just an actor. You also played football. Unfortunately, not so much anymore, but that's because you had some...
Probably fortunately for me now, with the lingering health problems from it, but yeah.
And you were also named by Commercial Observer as one of the 100 most powerful people in New York real estate and city.
Oh, boy.
40 under 40. But that was a couple of years ago.
Don't believe the hype. Yeah, that was in my youth. Now I'm out to pasture.
Listen, I'm over 40 and I've never been on that list and I will not be on that list, unfortunately. You also an adjunct professor at NYU Schack Institute of Real Estate.
It's true.
You hold numerous board positions and a great history and experience in real estate development, which is a dirty term that I will try not to use too much today, but it's a little different than just real estate development. You'll find out, Brenda.
Yeah, I'm very confused. I'd love to hear about it.
I want to introduce everybody to the great Tucker Reed of Totem.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm not sure I deserve the title great, but I'm happy to be here for sure. Thank you.
After all the research that I did, I must say, you're pretty great. And
says this to all the guests, right? Yeah.
Only the special ones.
Oh, okay. Which is every guest so far? Is that, yeah.
But remember, I only invite special guests on the show. So how would it be?
Good.
So you started out as going to and getting a degree in government from Wesleyan. What was your thinking there? What were your motivations for that particular major? What were your hopes for the future?
Yeah. Well, I guess in my youth, I was very kind of interested in like electoral politics, politics generally. And, Wesleyan didn't have a poli-sci major. So the closest thing to it was government. But it ended up being a real blessing because I think the more years I've kind of spent in the public realm or in and around government, elected officials play an important role in the, fabric of our city and in our country. But oftentimes the real kind of execution and governance work that goes on really happens in the kind of city agencies and the deep down the bureaucracy of the nuts and bolts of how things work. And so I've been much more attracted to that as my career's unfolded than to, have to go and shake hands and kiss babies and attend community board meetings every week. Although we have to do some of that as well.
I was going to say,
but yeah,
you're doing exactly what you necessarily wouldn't want to be doing.
I'm doing all the things, but not getting any of the accolades or honorable in front of my name as I enter the room, right?
So you majored in government. Is there anything interesting that you did or any internships that you worked at either right after school or during school?
Yeah, I mean, right after I graduated, when I first came to New York, I actually participated in a program called Coro. Some folks who are connected to the fabric of the city are probably familiar with. But I did the fellowship program, which was like a year-long series of internships in different kind of facets of the public realm in New York. So we interned at a city agency. We worked on a political campaign. We worked for a nonprofit. We worked for private companies that had interactions with, city government. So I worked everywhere from the United Auto Workers Union, with the subset of which was the Legal Aid Society here in New York City, to John Edwards' presidential campaign, to the Department of Transportation early in the Bloomberg days, to JP Morgan in their kind of affordable housing shop. So I got a kind of really well-rounded experience, ready to jam pack all those experiences into like a 9-month process. It was great for me to learn like what I wanted to focus in my career and also mostly like what I didn't want to do. I kind of learned pretty quickly sitting in a tower at JP Morgan that I didn't want to be like absconded in a cubicle all by myself to try to figure out how the world worked. And it was early days in the Bloomberg administration. And so even the experience working in the Department of Transportation for the period I did, they were standing up an office. And if I'm going into too much detail, tell me about, but they were standing up an office that was focused on coordination of the reconstruction of the World Trade Center site. And so as you can imagine, with so much of lower Manhattan shut down, the permitting processes and the bureaucratic hurdles, right, that everyone had to go through just to get the rebuilding efforts back up online and running. And so that responsibility fell to the Department of Transportation. There was a woman running the agency at the time named Iris Weinschall, who, if you're a real New Yorker, is Chuck Schumer's wife, probably the most important person in the Schumer family. And Iris, who was a great role model, even from afar at that time. I got to know her later in my career a little bit more, but just an amazing master of kind of bureaucratic magic. And so, those were like halcyon days as a young kid to be able to see, what was really happening in the rebuilding aftermath and to be a part of it in a little way. I was really drawn to go into work in the Bloomberg administration after my days at Cora.
What made you decide to stay in New York and not maybe either return to Connecticut or go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think, first of all, my girlfriend was from New York at the time. And so, we had access to a subsidized apartment on the Upper East Side that was helpful. Every young person in New York knows that housing is the hardest barrier, I think, to get in. But also just a ton of my friends from Wesleyan were here and I had family connections to New York. I'd always thought about coming to New York, so that wasn't really much of a leap. My mom's still in Connecticut. I still have a lot of affection for Connecticut, but it's a little too slow for my taste.
No, I understand a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah.
Did you have anybody in your family who was in either politics or real estate development that influenced you to go this route?
That's an interesting question. So I grew up really with my mom, was a single mom, and in my mom's side of the family, not so much. I mean, they were kind of avid followers of public affairs. And so grew up every night with my grandparents around when I was young, with watching the McNeil-era NewsHour on 13, probably the most boring news program that's ever existed on television. But kind of really ingrained in my head, I guess, kind of an interest in some of these issues. And they like to debate it around the table, things like that, but nothing professional. But oddly enough, on my father's side, who I was fairly estranged from most of my life, but I did get to know my grandmother on his side a little bit. And she was a big Biden early supporter. Apparently in the family law, Biden used to sleep on the couch during the campaigns in Lower Slower, Delaware. And call her mom, although now I've seen like thousands of videos of Biden calling every woman over the age of 30 mom. So maybe it wasn't as special as they made it out to seem in some of the stories I was told. But yeah, I have some amazing photos of her and Biden when Biden was first elected to the Senate. And so my grandmother, Rosie from Delaware, Sussex County, Delaware, was a pretty active kind of booster in the Democratic Party down there. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that was an influence, right?
Yeah, I guess by extension, it's in the blood, right? It's in the Irish blood that I inherited from her for sure.
So once you finished school, you also got a master's as well, right?
Yeah, that's kind of just a quick story if you want one.
We always want one.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, and I haven't probably talked about this very publicly. Not that anyone really cares that much, but it just goes to show like how little acts of kindness can make a big impact on your life. So I was running the Business Improvement District down in Dumbo that I had started after I left city government. I know we're skipping around a little bit, but I was running the bid down there. And I was interacting a lot with, real estate developers, and the market in Brooklyn was just kind of starting to take off at the time. And I found myself at a bit of a disadvantage when it gets to some of the language and the lingo in the industry, like what does FAR mean? And, real estate legal, but what are riparian rights? What waterway rights when it comes to waterfront property, things like that. And so I figured I should go get a master's degree in real estate development. And NYU had a great program I could do at night, so I could keep working because I didn't have the luxury of not working while I was doing it. And I kind of pitched my board at the partnership. I was like, at the bid. I was like, this is going to make me better. Maybe you guys can subsidize a little bit. And David Wallace walks in the room and goes, I'll pay for the whole thing, which was just, for me was amazing, right? So David and Jed were very kind and kind of subsidized my master's degree at NYU. And it paid tons of dividends for me. And also, it certainly ingratiated myself to the Williamsburg family, or I felt in debt to the Williamsburg family as a result of that, and have become very close family friends with them over the years too. So hopefully it was a winner for everyone involved, but it was a very kind thing for David to do for sure.
And I was actually going to save this till a little bit later, but I found a very interesting quote that I wanted to share from Jed Williamsburg.
Who's sure it's kind?
It's funny, which is why I'm reading it.
There you go. Yeah, that sounds more like it.
It's funny. It's from a New York Times article where he wrote that you have the ability to see the big picture, but you still love to get your hands dirty. And then he said, if you need beer for the party, Tucker is the first one to run out and get it. Or he'll head over to the precinct if something needs taken care of.
Yeah.
In other words, you can party, but you could also be business. So you're like a mullet. You're like the human mullet.
Party.
I got the episode.
Business up front, party in the rear. Wow. Okay. And I've never been called that either. There's a lot of stuff today, but
it's party in the front and
no, other way around. Business storefront. Yeah. I know the reference. Yeah, I remember that article. I remember Jed saying that. Jed and I have a lot of, I would say, like brotherly affection, right? So it's a big support. I was at the opening of the Domino Sugar Refinery last week, which was just an incredible accomplishment for Two Trees and for him. I'm not sure how they're going to tenant that building yet, but if anyone can do it, Jed can. I said that in the press to anyone who called me. And I think, learning and work. So I actually went to work at Two Trees after my experience running the bid and doing some other things. And, in the public-private partnership space, I don't think there is a better outfit in the city in terms of knowing how to navigate that space and really bringing to the forefront like community concerns and executing on it with private sector solutions. It's a lot of what I've tried to bring to my own work now. So I feel grateful that I got to kind of learn at the feet of the masters over there at Two Trees. To have the patience and vision that David has had over many decades to transform now multiple neighborhoods in Brooklyn. It's a pretty special thing to witness up front and personal,
Yeah, and I think, and we can get into this a little bit more as well, but that's one of the things that you adopted in your company, which is involving the community and doing things very different from what others are doing.
Yeah, it's actually to say, I don't understand why more people don't do it that way, to be honest. I guess it can be a little intimidating, right, to have to navigate that public-private space. Look, the vast majority of development in this town, as we look out your window here at all these beautiful, huge buildings here in Midtown, the vast majority of this stuff was built as of right? So other than you still have to navigate government with the Department of Buildings and other things, that are required to build anything. But the real kind of, nitty gritty, challenging parts of an entitlement process, or most developers won't subject themselves to. And I don't blame them because, none of the incentives are aligned really to encourage a developer to do that other than when you get to the end, but it's a binary process, right? Lots of people don't get to the end. But yeah, I think what we found in our firm is that just going and talking to people early and often, asking them what they'd like to see and not being afraid of some skepticism or, some outright off-putting reactions. But the more people you talk to, the more, I think, closer to truth you probably get about what neighborhoods or community need. And then I think what's special about what we try and do is apply private sector solutions to a lot of the public sector concerns that we hear. And it's a kind of, unique space for us to occupy and one that we're excited about.
To me, I think that's unique. I don't think you're the only ones doing it in the city, but I think it's not the rule. I think it's more of the exception because you want to involve the community. I know it's not always fun because I've been at community board hearings where I've just gotten, yelled at and reamed. And I listened to one of your stories on another podcast that you had done about insults and things like that, which I've heard because of some of the ignorance. And I think what you're doing is what we've been proposing and talking about, not proposing, but talking about on the podcast is coming out and working with the community, figuring out what they need and working with them, not just for your bottom line, but for everybody's bottom line. Because if you're working for everybody, everybody's happy, and it furthers the objective of building housing.
No, that's an interesting way of putting it. It's funny. I joked, Earl Lewis from New York One. I had the privilege of being on the show a couple of years ago, a couple of times. And he and I, it was an interesting takeaway from that time where I remember that we had talked about, you're doing the right thing if you're occupying the like well-informed, uncomfortable space, meaning that the more people you talk to, the more opinions you're going to hear, and the more awkward and uncomfortable it is then, because how do you deliver for everyone when everyone is saying they want something different, right? And so, I think part of our process is, just getting out there way ahead of like a ULURP vote or the standard clock that takes place like years in advance. If we're able to secure a property, or even before we may close on a property, we may be out doing our due diligence in the neighborhood, asking folks about, what they're interested in seeing there, and would they tolerate higher density or a change in use in order to make it all work. And so, it's an intimidating process. Like I said, most people aren't necessarily rewarded for it, because it's not like people don't necessarily give you a lot of credit for coming in and asking what they want to see, right? In fact, what you usually get is a litany of pent up anger and frustration from never being asked before you were there. And they have 20 years of reasons why they don't want to see whatever you're talking about doing happen. Many of the reasons are very legitimate. I mean, neglect and disinvestment and being ignored is not a very pleasant place for people to be. And unfortunately for neighborhoods, most of the time that they get the opportunity to kind of air those grievances or concerns, or when you're coming with your private application, as opposed to a kind of more comprehensive planning process that goes on in the city.
How do you go about doing that? How do you go about approaching in a informal way? You purchase a piece of property, you know what you're going to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
You're years away from doing that, but you want to approach the community. Do you do a meeting and put flyers up saying, come everybody to this town hall at 5:30 at this place? How do you get people in the community involved?
Yeah, we have done that. Those forums, when you get, a few hundred people coming in for a compressed time period of 2-3 hours, are usually not very productive in terms of real dialogue. You get screamed at for hours, which can also be fine as an opening salvo. Sometimes there's no way to avoid that to start, particularly if you don't want to be accused later on of, you didn't talk to everyone. You pick and choose who you spoke to. But I also think just like on a human level, it's just like, how would you gather opinions from your neighbors if you were doing anything else? You just start going and talking to people, right? And you meet your next door neighbor, you find out, what are they interested in? You ask them, who else should I go speak to? Or,
they're knocking on doors and talking to.
I wouldn't say literally, but sometimes, but certainly figuratively in almost every way. Right. Yeah. And so there's informal channels and formal channels. And the whole point though, is just, you got to be out there if you want to do it in any way. I think that builds some integrity, which fingers crossed here. I'd like to think that we are, but you'd find plenty of people who would tell you that, that we somehow subverted the process, even though we subjected ourselves to dozens and dozens of public interactions.
But it's nearly impossible to find a project that everybody's going to be in love with, right?
No, there's probably something really wrong if everyone really loves it, right? It usually means you can't build it because you gave away all your economics. So what's the point of doing it anyway, right?
So what drives you to still pursue this feat despite a lot of the pushback, given that lots of people who we've talked to either professionally, our clients or consultants, or those that we talked to on the podcast, they've said out of state, they're totally different. It's so much easier. Let's go to Texas, let's go to Florida, let's go to Jersey, wherever. Why is it that you think that you continue to move forward in New York?
Well, I literally am 12 hours off a plane from Houston, actually. I was in Texas yesterday looking at a property down there, believe it or not. We have not really ventured out of Brooklyn yet in terms of acquiring any sites, but I'm starting to look for sure. But that's also a function of a lot of different things. With the interest rate environment the way that it is, it makes purchasing in New York with land prices the way they are very difficult, and for a variety of reasons that are beyond just community concerns. But I will tell you, even in Texas, I spent a lot of time kind of due diligencing with folks yesterday, and there's government processes, and there's, local politics, and there's, that skill set is not necessarily just limited to the locale that you're in. It makes it easier when you can sit down with people face to face, but I think you find it anywhere. I would say, though, I think more directly to your point, that I think it's both a blessing and a curse, the moment that we find ourselves in the city right now as it relates to housing dialogue. I grew up in a time here in my professional career when there was downward pressure on development that usually came, from a place that was usually from people who already had land privilege protecting it, meaning rich homeowners in communities like Brooklyn Heights or Parkstead being like, we don't want any new development here. And unfortunately, what that did is it pushed a lot of new development into Black and brown communities who didn't necessarily have the same political power or voice to stop it. It wasn't like people were necessarily asking them what they wanted to see it. They just didn't have the same bully pulpit to stop it, right? So that probably wasn't so good for our city either. It certainly helped increase some of the housing supply, but it put an undue burden on communities that weren't asking for it, right? What's different about the housing dialogue now is that I think there seems to be some recognition that like communities across the city should bear the burden of new housing development. And I think folks are finally waking up to the fact that the housing constraints are a real problem, particularly for like our generation or even a little younger than me, right? I'm 43 now. That, you know, when we moved to the city when I was 23 years old, I mentioned I kind of lived with my girlfriend for the first 12 months or whatever, but I had to go out and find an apartment for $1,100 a month on a city salary of, $41,000 a year.
How much?
Yeah, dude. I thought I was rich, but then when I went to rent an apartment, I quickly figured out, how difficult that is, right?
Yeah, but $1,100 is like steal.
Still. Well, I shared it with 2 other roommates. Yeah. My portion was $1,100.
That's how it works. So you have to have many people.
Of course. But young people now probably. I'm not even sure they can find. And that was in Boerum Hill, Brooklyn, right? You couldn't find a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment in Boerum Hill for $3,300 a month today. It'd be impossible, right? And I think it's a direct, obviously there's inflation and time and all those things, but it's also just a direct reflection of that the city keeps growing and we don't build any new housing for folks. So then everyone wants to blame like me for trying to build one building as if I'm part of the problem when, I just trust in the data. The data tells me that I'm not a bad person for trying to build this building, despite what the people at the hearing are telling me. So I think that's how I kind of navigate that. I feel like, and not to be grandiose, so maybe it's too bad to say doing God's work, but I feel like building housing in New York City is a net positive for every single resident, depending on, and I don't care what product type it is. If you're building luxury condos, or you're building middle income housing, you're building low income housing, we usually steer away. We haven't done any luxury condo buildings, but there's a spectrum of housing needs in the city that aren't being met across the board. So the more housing you're building, I think you're really help alleviating one of the key foundational elements to what makes New York City great, which is our ability to attract the best and the brightest from across the world.
Yeah. And if you want to continue doing that, guess what? You have to
put them somewhere. Yeah.
You got to find jobs and make sure that they have money and that they have a place to live.
Yeah. And it's almost despite ourselves, it's amazing how much job creation continues to grow in New York, even after coming out of the pandemic. All the numbers show this sheer volume of job opportunities there are in New York. And I don't understand why we don't make the same, be able to connect the same kind of level-headed thinking to understanding that if jobs are growing and people are coming here, that we need a place to house them. And so we need to add housing supply, right? To me, it's as simple as that. And it's dressed up in a whole bunch of different things. And to alleviate it in any real way is going to take a significant amount of housing to come online all at once. But we've done it before as a city, and I still think this is the greatest city in the world. And I don't see why we can't do it again. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, it is. But it's what's not simple is trying to get above, the NIMBYism, which is mostly selfishness, because a lot of times people don't want it in their backyard because they think their property values are going to go down, that their services are going to go down. Too many people move into their neighborhood. They're going to have to move out because they won't be able to afford it. Some of those things are true. There is part truth to that, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah. And I think the dialogue in the city is starting to shift to a place where more and more of the regulators and policymakers are starting to recognize that. I think even, there are folks on the far left in the DSA camp who I think have started to recognize supply side economics as a real thing and not just made up numbers by some evil fat cat developers, right? So yeah, the complaints and the grievances are nuanced and complex, but to me, the solution is quite simple. It's how do we increase supply? And anything that is not in the service of that is probably a bad idea. And anything that is in the service of that within reason, that has the protections that are now built into so many pieces of the policy framework in New York City, from some of the probably better pieces of the rent laws. Some of the more onerous are probably difficult, but even the city's MIH program now, which mandates that new development in a rezoned area includes a significant amount of affordable housing.
Yeah. And we're working on a couple of projects with you in MIH. Mm-hmm. And exactly what you said, if there are certain areas that have been rezoned or upzoned, they fall within MIH, and you have to provide a level of affordability, ranging between 20 and 30%. And to build, you can't build a thing on there unless you provide that.
Yeah, you can't get a TCO until you deliver the affordable housing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And that means going through the entire HPD process on the front end and the back end, which is pretty complex.
And costly.
and costly.
for
Exactly.
the developer.
Which is why our office is here.
We're part of the cost, is what you're saying.
No,
we
I
help
didn't mean it
reduce
like
the
that.
price.
I meant more that
Course.
what drives the cost of housing being so expensive
We're-
are lots of a myriad of the issue of things like that too, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that has impacted MIH is the expiration of 421A and
Yeah.
the ability, the completion deadline has not been extended. Yes, they have the Gowanus workaround program that some people are participating in, but that's limited to Gowanus.
Which application deadline just passed?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how it pans out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also limited to folks that happen to get in the ground before the old program went away, which is a very small fraction of the, universe of people.
Not
I'm
only
sure
did you
that
have
would
to
want to
invest,
build.
but it had to be in Gowanus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you had to meet the deadline.
Right.
And you had to submit all this paperwork that you had to gather before this deadline.
That's right. And then you got to also on the other side, which is, the market, you got to go convince your lender that this funky new program that the government just came up with, where they're going to actually take possession of your property during during a period of time.
Yeah.
And then you're going to ground lease it back to get them comfortable with it. Right. Which is a whole nother ball game, which, the common person
Godspeed to them. I guess.
Well,
has no appreciation for, but is really what makes the whole thing work or not. Right.
and this is not a terribly new concept that they've come up with. It's just packaged a little bit differently. So hopefully lenders that were in that situation before, there are other programs that work that way for a ground lease.
There are, but never one that's been owned by the government, right?
Yeah.
And so in a state in particular where the rules around housing seem to be shifting every couple of years now, I'm sure that gives some lenders some pause about what's to prevent them from changing the rules on you down the road.
Yeah. You're also relying on that lender to be fairly sophisticated to know these other programs and understand that while you are deeding the property to the government, you're getting it back, and effectively you still have management control over the property.
Well, we get a lot of those calls where the lenders will want to get on a call with
Sure,
us about a
sure.
project. They rely on what we're saying to them. And
Sure,
our
I'm sure you're busy drafting a lot of legal opinions.
There's definitely plenty of work to go around for now. And one of the projects that I guess just skirted right was 1065 Atlantic Avenue. And I know that you're in partnership with Douglaston on that.
Uh-huh.
But is Totem still involved in that in any way?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, we're very lucky to be able to find a partner like Jeff Levine and Stephen Charno and Jed Resnick, a bunch of the guys over at Douglaston.
We love those guys.
Love it.
Amazing. I mean, Jeff Levine's a New York City legend, and getting to work very, up close and personal with them now to see the way they execute, particularly on the construction side, is phenomenal. So we couldn't have been happier about. We started Totem 6 years ago. I'm not in a position to sign a personal guarantee for $300 million for 400 and 400 odd apartments in central Brooklyn right now. But we also just didn't want to flip and sell the property. Like, we made a lot of promises during the rezoning period that I want to live up to. We also, we want to build a track record on execution on the other side of it. And so it's a great opportunity for us where we sold a significant amount of our interest to Douglaston and kind of let them take over the driver's seat, but we're still along for the ride. We still play a role. We get to learn a lot. And we also get to participate in the long-term outcome of the project, assuming it's a good one.
And you get to know Side and Shine.
And we get to know you guys. And we've worked on a couple of things already. So
Yeah.
Alvin is a legend in New York City as well, right? I know you guys are on your way, but
Totally. We're making a name.
I like that he said that without us having to prompt him. That was great.
that.
Thanks for reading my paper.
nobody working in affordable housing in New York City doesn't know who Alvin Shine is.
And that's what we're banking on. That everybody knows his name, and they do.
Sure.
He's definitely an authority.
Yep.
And how did you get to know Douglaston? How did they come into the picture? I understand why, but how did that come about?
I have a great couple of partners that I work with. One, Ofer Cohen at Terra CRG, who has run Brooklyn's kind of definitive investment sales brokerage for many years, and is now stepping more into a kind of part to full-time role with me on the development side. And so, his market expertise and sort of in terms of shaping a transaction, they're instrumental in terms of us being able to line up the site and purchase it and execute on it. We had 5 different parcels of land and 3 different transactions over the course of 2 years to put the assemblage together. I mean, Ofer and his team were an integral part of making all that happen. And then when it came time to go out and find the right partner, Ofer really helped spearhead our process. And we didn't go out and kind of market it to the world. We just went to folks we wanted. We had the privilege of sitting in a place where we could work with folks that we wanted to. And so we kind of had a short list of folks that fell in that camp, and Jeff and those guys quickly rose to the top. And we also have a family office out in Long Island, BEB Capital, who's increasingly doing more and more work in the city as well. Lee Brodsky, I don't know if you guys have heard of him yet, but you will, I'm sure, in the years to come. And Lee's also been a great partner, capital partner, execution partner. And so, Ofer, Lee, and I kind of put our heads together and decided that Jeff was the way to go.
I think that's a very interesting, and it's the way that it had to be because, as you said, it's when you're doing your first few projects, you don't have that name just yet, and it's hard to close on a loan.
Yeah, I mean, listen, for us at Totem, I started it 5-6 years ago. I used to run the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership in Downtown Brooklyn. My chief of staff there was a woman named Vivian Liao who came out of EDC in city government. And we've now been working together for almost a decade and a half, I guess. We're getting very old. She's had 2 children. There's so many things going on. But so Vivian came with me and we kind of started our venture and kind of made the decision that we didn't want to try to, bring on an investor who was going to take half or more of our economics for a risky venture right out the gate, that we would try to bootstrap it. So we've been kind of building the business methodically through smart partnerships with the folks like Ofer and Lee and other investors, but also just kind of bootstrapping our operation through some consulting and advisory work that kind of helped keep the lights on while we were out executing on these projects. And, that's scary, that's risky, that requires a stomach that, I think a lot of folks probably don't have, and for good reason, because it was difficult, particularly during the dark days of COVID. I was questioning myself many times, what the hell have we been doing?
I think we all were.
Yeah, but it's scary when, you own your own business during that time period, right?
Yeah.
Because particularly a fledgling one where it's like, man, 6 months ago, things were going so well. What the hell happened, right?
But one sneeze.
One sneeze.
One sneeze, and then it's everybody's in trouble.
Hopefully we're through those dark days now and moving forward into a much better time period.
Totally.
It seems that way.
You bring up your time at the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. Can you kind of talk about your time a little bit there and contrast your experience working for a nonprofit rather than forming your own company and moving into the profits?
Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting with the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, it really kind of sits at the nexus of public and private, right? So it was a good opportunity to bring to bear a lot of skill sets and relationships I had picked up in the private sector combined with my work in government. The biggest thing I think that was different about running the partnership was one, I mean, I inherited a massive staff. I had 50 people working for me and I had a $20 million budget. And, in this town, those numbers aren't like massive, but, for 31-year-old me and, kind of stepping into more of like a quote unquote executive role, that was challenging, right? And then we had 110 board members across 5 organizations because the partnership's actually an umbrella for a bunch of business improvement districts and LDCs. And so every quarter we would have to manage, 5 simultaneous, and everything used to kind of happen piecemeal and, we'd do on Monday. This will be board week. We'll do a board meeting Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And then by the time you finish them, it's almost time to start again for the next quarter. And so, we really worked hard to orchestrate it all, to pull it off all at once and get all these different boards kind of coordinated together. And so it was a massive kind of administrative challenge, right? And I spent a lot of my time dealing with people and admin and the meat and potatoes of like the stuff that I found really interesting, which is around land use or infrastructure investment or investment attraction to downtown Brooklyn, which we got to do a significant amount of, but, a lot of time gets distracted when you're running an organization of that side with just people, right? And so what's great about, where we sit now is I think we get to execute on projects of significant scale and impact, but I can do it with a lean and mean team. There's 4 or 5 of us. We could kind of swell up and down as we need to, if project grows or if our pipeline is a little bigger. But what's even better about it is we could just depend on, best in class consultants and advisors like you all and others in the space, right? Whether it comes to architects or land use council, and we don't have to have those skill sets in-house. It can collaborate and work with them in a very close relationship and manner, but I don't have the responsibility of making sure that they're keeping their lights on every week, or when their kid gets sick, that they're calling in and telling me all the reasons why they can't be there, right? So no, I like to be kind of lean and nimble right now. It's good for where we're at in our stage of growth and also my life. So it gives me some more freedom. Yeah.
And so when you were at the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, that's where you met Vivian. Mm-hmm. She was the chief of staff.
Well, I brought her on. She was not the chief of staff yet, but I hired her there. We had mutual friends. A lot of the folks, I'm sure if in your travels around, a lot of the Bloomberg people are very close, right? And they're all scattered out in various, private sector, public sector. Some are still in the new administration now or whatever, but there's a kind of real close community of our former Bloomberg people. And when I was hiring for chief of staff, a couple of friends had recommended Vivian. Yeah.
And then, but you decided to go, how did the idea of starting your own firm come about and you leaving this? It looked like you were very successful. You've had a lot of success in the partnership and had done a lot of good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just
nice of you to say.
No, well, I read a lot about it, so I'm hoping, I assume a lot of it's true, but there's just one thing in the New York Times article you wrote. This is an article that was written a few days before you were leaving, or was published a few days before you were leaving the partnership. Mm-hmm. First, I'm going to read this quote, which is, you said, "It's been inspiring to watch this new skyline take shape?
Oh my gosh, Tucker, you've been shaping the New York City skyline.
Sorry, I had to set her up for that one. That was very.
I love this bit. It will be my bit forever.
I think it's the only thing you and I talked about beforehand.
Well, there we go.
And the other thing is, you said, I've developed a lot of my own ideas about how the city should work, and now I want to put them into practice. So I leave it to you to expand on, how did you get Vivian on board? Why was she on board? How did the idea come up? Why didn't you just stay where you were? It sounded like you had a good gig.
Yeah, it was certainly kind of safe and comfortable. And listen, a lot of people who run these kind of public-private partnerships around the city, I think are, kind of stay there forever, right? Whether it's the larger bids or other things, it's comfortable. You have influence, you have a nice salary, you can make an impact on the city. But once you kind of get used to the rhythm of it, maybe it gets a little bit easier. But no, I think I was younger, but I still consider myself fairly young. I was ambitious. I had ideas about wanting to, kind of move more fully into or back into the private sector. I'd kind of been summoned to meet with some of the power brokers of the real estate industry around the city, thinking about maybe I'd go work at some of these larger firms. And I kind of harkened back to those days at JP Morgan I mentioned, where I was like, I didn't want to feel like I was just a cog in a machine at a larger operation, right? Where, I see it with friends. I see it, you get kind of pigeonholed at what you're good at. And it'd be like, oh, this is our zoning guy, or this is our public affairs guy, and I think I had a lot more to offer in terms of project management of real estate development execution that was, much bigger than just being the guy who took the reporters' calls, right? So, and what was starting to happen at the partnership was I was getting calls all the time, or people coming to see me because the, skyline was taking shape. During my tenure there, downtown Brooklyn attracted like $25 billion of new investment. I mean, I don't think I'll ever see a prolific run-up of a marketplace like that again in my lifetime, right? Now I had a catbird seat on it, and I knew every building and every owner and every block and everything that was going on. And so everyone was coming to me saying, well, where should I invest, or what should I do? And I was like, I'm so smart. Why am I telling everyone else what they should do? I should try to go do this for myself, right?
You should shape the skyline yourself.
Try to shape it myself, at least, one little piece at a time.
I don't know if you saw The Dark Knight. You see that Keith Ledger's Joker said, if you're good at something, you don't do it for free.
That's a nice reference. I like that.
My question is, how did you and Vivian come up with this idea and say, you know what, we're leaving, and it's a pretty bold move. Yes, people do it, but it's not often that people.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I have a pretty high risk tolerance is what it comes down to. And, I was ambitious, and I thought I had more to offer the city than just kind of being pigeonholed in a larger organization to do X, Y, or Z. Listen, I worked at Two Trees. I had an incredible time there. I learned a ton. I could have stayed there forever too. I mean, those guys, I think Jed Willentis will go down, and I don't mean this as like blowing, smoke up his bum, but like, I think he'll go down as the greatest builder of our generation. I think when people go back and look at the history of New York during this time period, there is nobody building more thoughtful, community-oriented, and yet at the scale that they can build with high design, everything than Jed. So, I could have been there and been a part of that. But I kind of felt like, listen, I don't care if you're running like your family's bagel shop or $1 billion real estate company. Like if you don't have the same last name as the founders or the principals, like there's only so far you can go, right? And so I guess I was, taking a bet on myself to see where I could go. And it's almost gone disastrously a couple of times for the last couple of years, but somehow we're still here and plugging away. And, Vivian's had a lot of, you'll have to ask her if you ever meet her, like, what motivated her to do it. But I think we just click. We're like peanut butter and jelly. Like we're like, two sides of the yin and yang, right? I mean, she's very different than me and reminds me often she has a very different style to my hard charging kind of muscular attitude on a lot of these things. She's much more kind of, I wouldn't say kind because we joke that she's a silent assassin herself, but she'll kind of jujitsu you a little bit.
Those are the best kind of people.
Totally. She'll kind of flip it on you. And so I think our styles complement each other well. And I think she's committed to, public service just as much as I am. And I think what was interesting for us is to try to chart a little bit of a new course of taking all that public sector experience and desire for impact in that realm and then using private sector tools to try to achieve them. And so we've been a great match, and it's flowed over into our new partnerships with folks like Ofer and Lee and the Levines and others. And so, we're excited to see where things go from here. We got a lot of big projects coming down the pipeline.
I'm going to turn back. The name totem, and we discussed this a little bit. You had said in another article that at the most basic, a totem is an object or thing that serves as an emblem or symbol of significance. For us, totem is our shared belief in the promise of cities. Further, we like the symbol in which the creation of a whole is greater than the simple sum of its parts, which we feel is reflected in the complementary expertise of our founders. And we had discussed this a little bit. There was a parable. I'm not sure. I actually tried Googling it, couldn't find it. But did you by any chance?
You know, it comes from a part of it. Part of the inspiration for us came from the old Brothers Grimm fairy tale, The Musicians of Bremen. You familiar with this?
No.
No, I mean, everyone knows Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood and stuff, but no, The Musicians of Bremen. So it was a quartet of kind of aged animals, I believe a dog, a cat, a rooster, and a donkey, who all go basically, they all walk into a bar in Brooklyn and
1065 Atlantic.
that's right.
About housing.
They all walk into a bar and one's a socialist and one's a capitalist and
One's a
one's a libertarian. No, so I believe, I don't want to butcher this, the old brothers, or, forgive me in their graves, but, the parable goes that they all get kind of cast out by their master, their owner, because they're all old and washed up and tired and he has no use for them anymore. And so they go out onto the road and they say, all right, we're going to Bremen, which I guess was like a kind of, some sort of allusion to Freetown somewhere. So they were off on their way. And along the way, they come across this house of thieves who had been robbing the local town and causing all these problems. And so they devise a scheme they all basically like stand on each other's backs and cloak themselves in some like discarded robe. And they basically scare the hell out of the robbers who abandon their loot and their house. And then they take all the loot and give it back to the town and they become heroes and accepted back into the fabric of the community because of, their ability to collaborate. Right. So I think, what was cute about that for us is just, it's the whole is stronger than the individual disparate parts, right? And I think that was very much true with Vivian and I's partnership. I think it's true with other of our partners that we've been able to work with. And, I think it's a kind of a cute metaphor, right? For if you want to do community development, rather than fighting each other the entire time, it's much more beneficial for everyone to kind of come together and have some tough conversations, but devise, what may be very ambitious plans on day one, but if you work together, you can achieve great things.
Yeah, it makes sense because that's the only way you're going to be able to get this stuff accomplished.
Yeah.
One of the things that Vivian said in another article that I mentioned is the 4 pillars that on which your totem is based, which is kind of similar to what you're saying. It requires a number of things to be working together in order for this to happen.
Yep.
And the 4 pillars she mentioned was affordability, economic stability, regenerative design, and partnership with community-based organizations. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, all those other things are important, but I think to me, what I want to focus on at least is those community-based partnerships, which I would assume that thinking came from working with government. That's a public sector idea that you're fusing into private sector development, which I think a lot of other private developers could take note of to work with the community and to get them right away. You had said that you like to work with communities and neighborhoods and collaborate with them once the land use discussions start happening immediately. I mean,
even before maybe they start happening in a kind of formal way.
The sooner the better, because then you're going to have
listen, I mean, I have throughout my career had the kind of interesting ability to kind of move from government to the private sector to the nonprofit sector. Kind of harkens back to those Coro days where, you got a bunch of different experiences all at once. So I think in a lot of ways I can, and again, not to toot our own horn very much, but both Vivian and I having run nonprofits. Vivian's a very prominent board member of the Brooklyn Community Foundation now. She spends probably more time than I'd like her to on that, to be honest. But it's also really laudable what she does there. And, I think it makes it, you could speak the dialogue of a nonprofit. You could share their concerns. I understand what it means to have to raise money every year to keep the lights on, right? I understand what it means to feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill with no support from anyone else except yourself. I understand what it means to be ignored by power players in the neighborhood or at the citywide level who you think should be doing more for you, but who for whatever reason don't. So, I think in some ways we could kind of speak the language or empathize with some of the challenges that they're facing. And what makes it great though, from a kind of coming up with a right place to form partnership, and we sit down together, we're never asking our community partners to do something for free or to do something that was going to distract them from their core mission. It's more like, this is how this aligns, serve it up on a silver platter. Very similar to working with government, right? This is how this aligns with your core mission of what you're trying to achieve. This is what you've told us that you'll need in order to be able to work with us on it. And let us go into the laboratory and see if we can come up with solutions to allow you to participate with us. And I think thus far, our community partners, folks like Bed-Stuy Restoration in Central Brooklyn. I don't know if you know the folks at Evergreen with the big industrial advocacy group in North Brooklyn, housing groups like Fifth Avenue Committee and Michelle Deleuze and others. We don't agree on everything, and that we don't need to, right? We find the places where we can focus on helping each other achieve our collective goals and just go out and execute.
Yeah. I think that approach and that perspective is what's made you so successful.
Yeah, well, that's nice of you to say. I'm not sure I'm successful yet, but I do think it makes for successful dialogue. It's just I don't understand more. we live in a country and a time right now where everyone feels like we have to agree on everything or I'm canceling you or writing you off or like, I don't know. We don't have to agree. I don't agree on like 2/3 of the things during a given week. I don't agree with my own wife, who I love more than any person on this planet, right? So what makes you think that I'm going to agree with every single person in a, community-based hearing about X, Y, or Z? It's like, we don't have, how about we agree on something and then work really hard on doing that together as opposed to worrying about like, is this shade of green like aquamarine or light or, blue-green? Like, who cares, right?
I think everybody can agree we need housing. That's sort of the premise, right?
One would hope, yes.
The question is, though, where do you build it? And how do you build it? And how much of it do you build?
And the question we hear all the time is affordable for whom?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good question.
Big question.
It leads a little bit into the next question I have is, your focus is on mixed income. I don't know if you're thinking about going the fully affordable route. That's a very difficult route because subsidies are hard to come by.
Yeah, we've thought about it a lot, but just the reality of, and we're actively looking at things, but the realities of getting in line at HPD for that subsidy is, daunting when you're thinking.
Yeah.
The ULURP process of 3 to 4 years is scary enough. Now you're waiting in line for subsidy for HPD. Dude, 2.5 years would be fine. But I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues who are very, steeped in this field. You could be in line for 7 or 8 years at this point.
Well, I hope not, because I'm being told 2.5 years with one deal.
It is catastrophic for, obviously, your ability to execute or carry a property, right?
For a city that's in a housing crisis that needs more housing, how are you taking 7 to 8 years
There's no
to
money.
build more housing?
They don't have the money.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's a resource constraint, right? But yeah, which is all the more reason for programs like 421A and others that would spur housing development that would cost the city $0. It seems like insane that we just chopped off our left arm over the last couple of years in a housing crisis. And now we're completely dependent on government subsidy to make affordable work.
Yeah. And even the government itself has said, we can't do this by ourselves.
Yeah.
It's going to take you 5 years to close. We need the private sector to come.
Yeah, listen, I think more and more people are seeing this though, right? You see more and more policymakers. I think hopefully everyone is coming to the realization. The data just shows it. You see how precipitously the number of new building permits have dropped off since 421A went away. I'm hopeful that in 2024, there'll be a new housing bill. There'll have to be some sort of compromise on good cause, which scares the hell out of everyone on my side of the table. So defining what that is or how that can work still needs to really be worked out. To me, that seems like the biggest stumbling block in order to get a new housing bill. But I would hope on the other side, there's some recognition that we need a grand compromise with like a long sunset. Like you got to put in place a 10-year program. None more of this 2-3 year, then we got to do it all over again.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a compromise on good cause or something that's that monumental for, I think, our side of the private sector side of the industry to get their heads around, I think the only way that can work is if there's some concession around the length of the abatement. It's creating a new regime. And so you got to give people enough time to figure it out and execute on it. And so, 10 years minimum, if not 20, would be something that I think would give great comfort to the marketplace, right?
Would that really just demolish the income stream from market? How would the things be able to pencil out? Even
I'm not smart enough to know. You guys probably have a little bit more insight. And obviously there's folks in the, housing policy camp that follow this much more closely. I focus on executing on my little projects under the current regime as it stands.
Little projects, including a 17-story fully electric building.
Right. But, there's got to be some sort of compromise there, right? There has to be. And by the way, I'm not so sure that most of the people that are out there advocating for a good cause even know what the hell it means.
Yeah. Right.
Because even on my side of the table, you guys have a whole business explaining to developers what 421A is and how it works, right? So, it's not naivete just on, the opposition. It's, everyone needs to understand how the rules work and what they are and figure out if they're workable. And so, I'm hopeful that the folks in government who spend the majority of their time thinking about these issues can craft a compromise that will work for everyone.
Yeah.
They should listen to our podcast. See if they can figure stuff out.
Well, in its root, it starts with going and talking to everyone and figuring it out, right? Again, it can't be, the legislators are afraid to talk to the developer. Those are the two camps that are having to work this out. So to the extent they're not engaged, that to me is the most disappointing part of it. The fact that the discussion is being waged on like Twitter and like 30-second snippets over nonsense, as opposed to like sitting in a room and getting everyone to like really recognize the costs and benefits of these decisions. That's really, I'm hopeful in 2024, that's what the legislature does.
Yeah.
We're hopeful too. We're not we're thinking that's not going to happen, but we are hopeful.
We're hopeful.
Yeah, I don't know. At a certain point, the blame is going to come back around to them, right? Because the governor and the mayor are both saying the same thing, that we need a program. The industry is all saying the same thing, that we need a program. So, at a certain point, there's no one left in the room holding the bag, right? It's like what's happening in Washington with the budget deal this week, right? Like eventually, like the, perpetrators of the point of view that's preventing anything else from happening, like, are held responsible. So, and that, I don't mean that in any threatening or negative way. It just means it's, I think the onus is on them now to come to the table. And by them, I mean everyone in that room, right? The leadership of our industry, the leadership of the legislature, the leadership from both city and state government to sit in a room and figure this out. Yeah,
but I think that by that time, at least some of the damage will have been done.
Oh, every day that goes by, the damage is being done right now. It's, and listen, in my mind, and not to be too highfalutin about it, the housing crisis is part and parcel and at the same scale of the climate crisis. It's the same thing. It's just another piece of the climate puzzle, right? It's cities like ours that have less of a carbon footprint on the planet than anything else. We want to save humanity. It's cities like ours that we need to allow to grow, to reduce our consumption and footprint across the globe. And so now everyone wants to talk about a Green New Deal or all these great things to save the planet, but we're putting downward pressure on housing expansion in lessening our collective, carbon footprint. Like, it doesn't take too long to like get to the point to understand, like, opposition to housing expansion is like destroying our planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not to be hyperbolic, like that's like literally, I think, what the facts show.
Yeah.
Well, you need people. Thank you.
Yeah.
You need people, and you need to make sure that they're housed and they have jobs, like we said earlier. I think it's crucial. So there is no 421A. Obviously, you have a couple of projects that did qualify. Mm-hmm. Both of them MIH.
Well, because we worked our tails off to get them in the ground before the program went away. But yeah.
And
that's what you had to do.
Correct.
And you sort of just made it. There was an article I saw that you were, both Douglaston and you reported in that article about how you just made it because lenders are not, if you don't have your shovel in the ground by whatever date, lenders are not.
Yeah, I think the window's closed on lending now for any new 421A project. I mean, there's just, you don't have enough time to complete the project by June of 2026 at this point. Right?
Yeah, we have a few projects that are now out to market for lending, and it's a big issue. Yeah. You're going to have to find some mom and pop shop who's willing to give you $1 billion. Yeah,
at an interest rate that's probably going to bankrupt your project long term anyway. So if I were them, I'd think about just mothballing it, to be honest, at this point.
And just sitting on it. So
if you can, right? Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
So you have these projects in their work, but how are you going about with the new development to the extent that you're doing anything or thinking about doing something new in New York City?
Yeah. So we've been looking a lot at 100% affordable. We have a very big project that we've been working on for a number of years now out in Broadway Junction in East New York that we still have a few years of the Euler process to go through. It's a huge project. It's 4 city blocks, over 1 million square feet of development rights if we're successful in the rezoning. And it's a combination. We made the commitment to that community, to any housing built there, to be 100% affordable. So we will be in the HBD, queue. Hopefully there's some political desire to see, a lot of promises have been made to East New York over the last number of years. I think the Adams administration laudably has focused a lot on East New York now. And the new council member out there, Sandy Nurse, who we don't see eye to eye with on everything, but I think we have a, productive public dialogue with around what should happen there. And she's provided great leadership in terms of coordinating all the disparate, interests out in Broadway Junction. And so, I'm hopeful that the ULURP gets approved and that we start to deliver on a significant amount of 100% affordable out there. And also be, other asset classes, retail. There's a significant amount of industrial and commercial associated with our development as well. We're thinking about that project in the timeframe of decades, not years. And so, longer term, what the office market looks like in communities like that, or, other uses that may crop up to replace them, we'll have a footprint that can accommodate a lot of interesting things out there. We're talking everything from marijuana grow facilities on the industrial side and processing plants to record and recording companies that may want to have a presence in communities where a lot of their talent comes from, to, mom and pop candle makers and small businesses in the neighborhood who have said to us, if you can get this built, we'd love a space to kind of show our local wares. East New York is an incredibly entrepreneurial community. It's amazing out there. And so, our site happens to sit on one of the last great undeveloped transit hubs in New York City. You got 5 subway lines and a branch of the regional rail, Long Island Railroad, stops right there. And so maybe you can even attract some reverse commute folks from Long Island who'd want to come into the city to work. So, long term, it's great dirt at a great spot, and that's in a community that really needs, support. And so I think we are the first kind of private sector player in that area to step up and say, we'll take some of the arrows as we figure this thing out and, we'll be working on this for many years to come. And so we'll see what happens. But
it's an interesting project. And I know there's been a lot of, in the ULURP process, as a whole ULURP process goes, there's a lot of controversy, a lot of debate about the project and how it's going to serve the community.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you come up with that property?
Yeah, I mean, we scour Brooklyn all the time for opportunities. When I ran the partnership in downtown Brooklyn, I thought for a long time that, back then we had a very small vacancy rate for commercial uses. The office uses in downtown Brooklyn were basically full. So we thought a way to open up some of the office space in downtown would be to move some of the government agencies out to East New York. Really advocated for that. Borough President Adams at the time really kind of seemed to take to that. They're actually now as mayor, a big idea of his and Andrew Kimball from EDCs out there is to move a significant amount of city agency out to Broadway Junction. They're working on a development kind of catty corner to ours to bring about 1,100 city worker jobs out there and to hopefully still to inspire a new central business district a little bit. So it was a combination of kind of, us scouring Brooklyn for opportunities and looking at communities where we think we could be of help. And then, some of my old iterations of my life coming back to the future in terms of, ideas that we had in downtown Brooklyn that we can now maybe help go execute on in East New York.
Is this the first space you've had? Well, I guess you've had commercial previously, but I know when you were in the partnership, you had increased or rather decreased the vacancy rate, which is significant. It was significantly higher vacancy rate for commercial spaces.
Yep.
Commercial.
So I love commercial. Commercial to me is very exciting. I love the dynamism around being around companies that are growing in New York and the kind of entrepreneurial culture associated with it. Coming out of COVID, commercial office as a asset type is very difficult to get your heads around. You certainly can't find any financing for it. So I think for us moving forward, it will be more around how we integrate some small footprints of it into our larger kind of mixed use developments. But, see where the world goes. And it's certainly a problem set that I'm drawn to. And we'll just have to see how kind of things pan out over the long term.
That's your large capacity for risk taking.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
And so the Broadway Junction is going through the ULURP process. Are you approaching HPD now or any other agencies about funding, getting them interested in the project, trying to start the queue? How does that work?
Yeah, I think generally a best practice is you start making everyone aware that this is coming down the pike, right? I mean, most folks in government are not going to want to, or the private sector, right, are not going to want to, spend a lot of time and resources on something until they know it's like a sure thing, meaning you're entitled or you're in a position to, really get into their queue. But, we meet with HPD, we meet with EDC, we meet with all the, obviously, city planning early and often on our application. And so they're all aware of our effort there. But I think what's kind of inspiring to see out there is, regardless of our small project, that the city is investing and the state are investing a ton of time and attention in Broadway Junction now after decades of neglect. I think it was kind of started with the East New York rezoning a few years ago, but now in Broadway Junction in particular, the mayor and the governor announced $750 million of infrastructure investment that they're pouring into Broadway Junction in the coming years. A lot of it is going into the transit hub, the train station, to upgrade it to ADA accessibility and other things, which has been a community promise for many decades. But also in terms of new streetscapes and new infrastructure in and around the junction, which obviously, will impact our project, help potentially, minimize the impact of new development in Broadway Junction. It's one of the rare instances where you actually see government getting out in front of new development to provide the infrastructure investment, right? And for my days in DUMBO or in downtown Brooklyn, usually what you see happen is the market starts to do something and then government plays catch up, right? And says, we need to update the sewer. When I was in DUMBO in 2005, every time it rained, every sewer in DUMBO still flooded because DEP had not cleared out the sewer lines and hadn't repaired a broken one in decades, right? And so they started to pay more attention because the private sector was paying more attention, right? Now it's almost the opposite out there with, I think everyone sees the potential. The community's been asking for it. Government's getting out there first and potentially making some of the investments that will be required for somebody like me and hopefully many, many others, right? To come in and build a significant amount of new housing and new retail and a lot of the services that folks out there have been asking for a long time.
Yeah.
What gripes can the community have about a 100% affordable project?
Yeah, I mean, gripes, I think, is a little unfair to the neighborhoods, right? It's like, if you've been told a lot of different things by many different people over many different years and none of it has come to fruition, you would have a healthy sense of skepticism as well, right? It's only so many times you can be lied to or misled before you start mistrusting everyone, right? So I think there's certainly a healthy aspect of that that's there. But also it goes back to that question of around affordable for whom, right? Nobody in my dialogue around affordable housing development out there, none of us have the power to decide affordable for whom, even though they think I do, right? Or they want to tell me that I do, or I would like to think that the community board should have some influence on it, or even the council member has some influence on it, right? It's programs that are set at the federal and state level that we all operate in the sandbox with that are completely outside of our control. And so that's frustrating. I mean, that's frustrating for everyone, right? And so some of it's a kind of learning and education process on all sides to understand like what we can impact and what we can't. And then the benefit, though, of being there early and often is that you can take the time instead of just showing up at the ULURP hearing for, the first time you're explaining and everyone's rushed in 2 hours to understand a project and they are forced to make an opinion. You can spend a year or two. In this case, we'll spend probably 3 years meeting with that community board before our project comes up for a vote. And so we've been able to take the time to go through iterations of, I hear you, what you're asking for. This is why I can't provide it. Here's the party that is potentially responsible for it. Why don't we go together to talk to them about it? It just creates a different dynamic of empowerment around these kind of discussions.
I think it's a great way to approach it. And I think you have a really great perspective. And we really appreciate you coming here, Tucker.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So much for coming in.
I love the perch of the world that you have here.
Yeah. I just sit here sometimes and just stare out.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
You have the time for that?
Yeah. These are all the billable hours he's on the phone. Yeah.
Well, that's why I have you to do all my work for me.
Yeah, I'm here for you.
Is there something that you want to either plug or, any social media that how people can reach out to you if they need to?
Yeah, I mean, you can find our website at totembrooklyn.com. You can reach out to us if you want. I mean, I'm a little active on Twitter, though I kind of try to stay out of it, mostly just to play defense to make sure that there's no misinformation about, what we're up to out there. But, generally I try to stay off of the social. I find that it's not very helpful to the creative process or having faith in humanity.
It's
fair
point. Although we do it because we want to make sure that we get the word out.
Yeah. So, when you get this up, I'm happy to push it out a little bit on our channels.
No, we appreciate that.
But congrats. I think there needs to be more dialogue in this space for sure in the city. And so, there's actually really few, I think, compelling, outlets for discussions around, housing and land use in the city in this space. And so, kudos to you guys for doing this.
No,
aim to be the big one.
There you go.
And that's exactly one of the purposes of the to provide that kind of forum for this discussion. And hopefully it'll be helpful for the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
All right,
so
so much.
Enjoy the fall.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@sideandshine.com or visit our website at sideandshine.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@sideandshine.com and Beaslakowski at sideandshine.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.